Alright, hello, this will be the answer, or rather solutions, to homework number 6. Hopefully if you're watching this, you have already attempted homework number 6, and really you should only be watching this if you have tried it. Otherwise it won't help you. So let's just get started. There's only 2 of these. I tried to make it short, because I know you guys need your winter break and stuff. 6a, write a program that calculates the sum of all the numbers 1 through 100. That would be 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, etc., etc. Don't use shortcuts or formulas. There are a few if you look online. You can find there's Gauss's formula. There's other things you can do to solve this. We are going to use a while loop to do this. Alright, so here I have a default .java file, and that means that you start before you add the program. Now, first thing I'm going to do is bring this bracket down and bring this bracket down so we can easily see. Notice how it highlights them. I've said this before. You really want to make sure you're coding in the right place. So, almost all of your coding will be done in the main. The only things you might have to do outside of the class is something like an import. And the only thing you would do outside of maybe the main method is when we talk later about making your own methods and working in that. But we haven't done anything like that, so you never would type right here. Okay, be very wary of where you are coding. Now, first thing we got to do is we got to write some pseudocode. So let's just gonna comment an area here. Notice the slash star and star slash is comments. The compiler won't read that, and it won't be part of your code. It's for you only. So let's make a little more space. Alright, so we know there has to be a counter. So let's just, I'm going to call it sum. We know we're going to have to declare some sort of sum because we're going to have to print out that sum at the end. Remember, the goal is to calculate the sum. Well, you can print it out or just store it to some variable. So I'm going to call there to be declare integer sum. Okay, that's going to be my first thing. And it's very important that you'll see later that you actually do this outside of the while loop, because you know you have to use a while loop, but I'm going to clear it outside the while loop because I'm probably going to want to use it outside of the while loop. So let's see, we learned in loops how to go about iterating through a certain set of numbers. For example, we iterated through 1 to 10 and printed out the even ones. Well, this is just 1 through 100 and we're doing every one. So we're going to need a counter variable. So declare counter variable. Okay. Then we're gonna start while. And I'm gonna indent it so we can be sure that we're in the while loop, so it's just clear. Okay. Then what we're gonna do is, we know we have to before we forget, we're going to increment counter. Okay, that's before we leave. But what are we actually doing? Well, we're going to add counter to the sum. Now, if you envision this, think about what you're doing here is that counter represents each number 1 through 100. So if we make a little table here, it's going to be the counter, and each time the loop is iterated through, each time a certain bit of code is executed, the counter is going to range from 0 to 100. Okay, by going, it's going to start at 0, declare integer, or declare counter variable 0. We'll just say that integer sum equals 0. It's going to start at 0, and then every time you increment it before you leave, it's going to go to 1, 2, then it's going to be 3, then it's going to be 4, then it's going to be 5. and it's going to check start while loop. What are we going to say? While loop, while counter is less than, what do we want to be less than? We want it to be 101 or 100. Well, if we're including 100 in our count, saying we're going to do 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 100, we want it to do it while it is less than 101 or less than or equal to 100, because when we want I to become 100 and still enter the loop. And if it is that we put only less than 100, then when I is 100, this will prove false. Remember, this is a Boolean statement, and this will prove false. But we want it to prove true, so we do 101. Okay, so and the main piece of code that is actually going to do a work for us is add counter to sum. This is going to, sum starts at 0, and sum is something that just keeps being added. Now, how do you add, as kind of a note here, how do you add something continuously? You have to say sum equals, because if you're adding something to sum, that means you always start with sum equals. Something is being assigned to sum, okay? And sum equals, well, you don't want to override anything. You just want to add something. And whenever you add something, you have to say sum equals sum plus something else. So always repeat repeat the variable that's being added to. Okay, now you can also say this by saying sum plus equals. This is a shorthand that many programmers do, because it's very common to say sum equals sum plus something else. We'll just leave it like this for clarity purposes. And sum equals sum plus, well, what are we doing? We're doing add counter to sum. So now sum equals the same thing it was, but plus, you're going to add the counter. Okay, so if sum is 0, then it's going to add 1. Okay, then sum is 1, but then it's going to add 2. It's going to say sum equals that 1 plus 2, and it's going to say that sum equals that 3 plus another 3, and it's going to say that sum equals that 6 plus another 4, so you see how it works. Alright, let's just code this really fast. Declare integer sum equals 0, you have to do that if sum equals 0, okay, semicolon. Declare counter variable, int I, usually we use I equals 0, and we're going to say while I is less than 101. Okay, then we have our brackets nice and neat like that. NetBeans should do it for you. And notice that we also indented here. So start while loop, while counter is less than 101, add counter to sum, counter plus equals sum. Okay, and notice that we didn't actually call anything counter, it's just sum equals plus equals counter. That was weird. That makes a lot more, no, not counter, equals I. That makes a lot more sense. And then what we have to do, don't forget this, we have to say I plus plus, meaning incrementing I, meaning I increases by 1. That's the same thing as saying I equals I plus 1. The same thing as saying I plus equals 1. Okay. And this has to have a semicolon. Alright, let's see. Now, just for sakes of seeing what the answer is, we're going to print it out. So I'm going to print out sum at the end. See what was the result of our coding. And notice that we have to declare sum outside of here, right? So if we declared inside, okay, then there'd be an error here, and it says cannot find symbol variable sum because it's inside the loop. It's called a local variable. So this needs to be outside so that it recognizes things outside the loop. Wherever it's declared is where it can be used. Okay, it can be used outside the loop, just like it won't know what sum is up here. Okay, if you try to use sum up here. Okay. Whoopsies. Look at all those errors that happen. Yeah, look. That's why if you have a bunch of errors, it's probably because of a bracket problem. Alright. Pull this down. And let's see this run. Everything looks good. and we have 5,050. Alright, so that would be the answer to our problem here. Let's do the second one. Pull this down. And I'm just going to delete all this. Or actually, we're not going to delete this because we can reuse things probably. Write a program that asks for a string input. So this time we're sort of switching gears. We're not going to probably use ints, but we might use a while loop. Okay. Actually, we will use a while loop. So we just have the basic framework here. And we want to write a program that asks for a string input. So string input, what are we going to use? Whenever you hear input from the user, it's always going to be a scanner. I'm not going to go over that. I've already gone over that. We're going to do import Java.util.scanner, and these two ends, checker spine, and it's unused, so we're going to use it right here. Scanner in, and then we're going to say we're going to write a program that asks for a string input from the user. So at this point, let's start doing some pseudocode because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to, I was kind of winging it, but let's not wing it. Let's think about these things. So, what kind of, you have to ask yourself, how many inputs am I taking? Well, write a program that asks for a string input. Now, if you want to make this fancy, you can do it where you do this for multiple things, but for sake of simplicity, we're just going to do this for one input. It could be any input, like the example had Nathan, but you can do anything. So that's why we're using scanner. But let's just assume we have one input. So our first step will be assign input to variable. I'm probably going to call it input. That's my guess. Okay. So after that, then we're going to have to start a while loop. Because why do we need a while loop? Well, if you think about it, if you're separating everything by a space, so you have Nathan, okay, what's your code going to look like for an individual thing? Well, you're going to start at the first one, and after the first one, you're going to put a space. Okay. Yeah, in fact, what we're going to do is we're not going to mutate anything. We're not going to change the individual input, but we're going to declare another variable, and we're going to store the desired result, which would be this, into that new variable. So let's actually just say declare new variable called, let's say result or something, and we're going to store this into that. We're not actually going to change input, and you'll see why we do this. It's a lot easier to work with, right? So why do we need a while loop? Well, because we don't actually know the length of a given input. Say we have Nathan. Okay, well, for each, and I'm saying for, which is another word, but we're going to say for each letter here, we want to copy that letter plus a space into result. Okay, now we don't know how many letters are in there. So what we're going to do is make a while loop. We're going to say while, actually we call a counter variable, and we're going to say while, and we're going to say I, which is the counter variable, is less than input, and we can say less than the length of the, okay, now I is going to start at 0. Remember, we can say less than length of input and not length of input plus 1, because I starts at 0, because that is the index that we would like to, because indexes start at 0. So we can say less than, remember, and in this case it is less than. So while in the other problem we had I go from 0 to 100, I is still a number, but this time I represents a letter. Now what method, remember the word method, are you going to use to make a number represent a letter? Well, we're going to use the char at method. Okay, char at gives the letter at a specific, or character rather, at a specific index. So if the index is 0 and we had Nathan, char at 0 would return n. Now, remember with all methods, special implementation, you have to use them on something, and you can't just say char at, it's not going to return anything. But we'll see that later. So I is less than length of the input, and we'll have this, and we're going to copy over each letter plus space to each letter of input plus a space into result. Okay, and then we can, just for fun, print result at the end. Okay, so let's do this. Scanner in, we got scanner. So before we declared our scanner object, but now we have to use the scanner object. And what are the methods associated with it? It is assign input value to variable. So we have int, or not int, sorry, string input equals in dot, remember it has to be the name of the object, dot next, and I'm going to say next line. Now while, oh, I forgot to do counter variable, int I equals 0. Okay, where I is less than input dot length. Okay, and remember at the end we have to say I plus plus, let's just not forget that. So I is less than, this looks weird. Well, I is less than input dot length, so we're over here, length of the input, copy over each letter of input plus a space into result. We need to declare string result, and then you can just say string result. I think it won't yell at you, but in case it does, equals that, meaning just an empty string. This isn't a space, okay? If you don't do space, you just do empty string. Okay, so result equals, whoops, and remember you can concatenate strings. So what does result equal? Equals result plus, and we're going to say copy over each letter of input, oops, plus a space into result. So each letter of input, we're going to say input dot, remember input is a string, and input is the name of the string, so you can use the method char at, dot char at I. Okay, result equals result plus input dot char at I. What did we forget? We have to also say plus a space. Now this will actually at the end make result have an empty space at the end, but we're not going to worry about that because it's invisible anyway. There are methods that you can use to trim it down later, but we're not going to worry about it. So let's just trace over what we did. And there's an error, and because we forgot a semicolon. I is going to go from 0 to the length minus 1. So you're going to reach all the indexes of a given inputted thing like Nathan. It's going to go from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's going to be 0 to 5, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's going to copy over the index at I. So for example, if I is 0, it's going to copy over n plus a space. And then it's going to be certain to result, and then you're going to compound that with the next index, the letter at the new index plus a space, and compound that and keep compounding it. So that's how while loops work, and that's a very common pattern. So last thing, let's just print out result, and let's see what we get. I'm going to type in Nathan, or whatever, and look, it worked perfectly. Alright, so thank you for watching. If you have any questions, you can just email or type in Edmodo. But other than that, hope you had a good holiday, and I'll see you on January 10th, or unless you're watching this after the fact. Goodbye.